Hello everybody, I'm Kate Cass, welcome to our edition of Let's Talk About. Today, let's talk about Shadow the Hedgehog.
Again?
A few years back, I did a 3-part series going over the history of Shadow the Hedgehog throughout various Sonic the Hedgehog media. Because Shadow is my favorite Sonic character, I cannot shut up about him, and when I cannot shut up about something, that becomes your problem. Like and subscribe. That retrospective was never really meant to have a follow-up of any kind. I knew Shadow would continue to appear, but I was content to leave that look into Shadow in that trilogy of videos. Then 2024 happened, a year with more Shadow-related content than ever before, all rich and diverse, and more than worthy of discussing further. There's so much extra Shadow the Hedgehog material since I made those videos, I feel like leaving out this resurgence for him would make the whole thing feel incomplete. For the sake of completion, I'll also be going over stuff between the gap from those previous videos and the Year of Shadow. So buckle up and get ready for a chaos blast because we're doing this all in one go. This is History of Shadow the Hedgehog, Year of Shadow Edition. So, unlike the previous installments where we broke it up into games, cartoons, and comics, we're gonna go in rough chronological order for this one. Not strictly from the oldest to the newest, but I feel like it's best to do it this way in this case because Shadow's depictions have evolved significantly since the first History of Shadow video back in 2017, which came out right before the release of... I have such a complicated relationship with Sonic Forces, it's not even funny. I think I introduced some of the most fun and intriguing pieces to the modern era of Sonic, and then proceeded to rush through the story and do basically nothing with any of it. But for all of Sonic Forces' faults, Shadow, oddly, might have suffered the least from them. Partly because he's mostly absent from the game. Shadow's presence is mainly through these very inconsequential illusions that the game's main villain, Infinite, creates. Having so many returning villains was a big selling point when Sonic Forces was first announced, but they're not even real, and you only get to fight half of them.
Hey look, it's a fake me.
Uh-oh.
I hope you didn't get your hopes up for a boss fight.
Yeah, I know, right?
The real Shadow does eventually show up and help Sonic and the gang in the battle against Eggman and Infinite, but where was he all that time? The events of Sonic Forces occur over months, so why didn't Shadow step up before then? Well, we sort of find out in a special additional campaign, episode Shadow. As it turns out, their current conflict might have been instigated by Shadow himself. Shadow confronted Infinite back when he was just a mercenary, taking out his entire squad off screen and knocking down Infinite without breaking a sweat. This incident haunts Infinite so much that he completely buried his former life down to not showing his own face and agreed to be experimented on by Eggman, fusing him with the power of the Phantom Ruby in order to make him far stronger than Shadow. I feel like this backstory does illustrate the pros and cons of Sonic Forces. On the surface, this is kind of silly. Not helped by the dialogue, honestly. Shadow calls this guy worthless and pathetic, and he's so insecure that he changes everything about himself from this one encounter. Dude took the "don't show your face to me ever again" comment to the most extreme level possible. But I think there is something substantial here. This guy was so confident in his ability to take down any threat he was assigned to that he charged in against the ultimate Lifeform. But Shadow has no tolerance for ignorance and an unchallenging threat, so he kicks him to the curb to prove a point. A point that affects Infinite deeply. Not able to handle that he couldn't stand up to a target. Not able to handle fear and doubt. So instead of confronting those feelings, he buried them under a deeper facade of power and conquest. It really speaks to the reaction each had to that confrontation when Infinite feels such venomous vengeance towards Shadow when they meet again, and Shadow doesn't even remember him.
It's amazing how you thought about nothing but me during all this time, when I forgot you were even a thing!
But this isn't an Infinite video, it's a Shadow video. If it was Infinite, it would be far shorter. Presumably, the main reason Shadow's not in the bulk of the main game is because Infinite is able to trap Shadow in near-endless illusions, and when he breaks free, he was trying to take down all the fake Shadows Infinite created. There's a great story buried in the conflict between Shadow and Infinite. As a foe spawned from Shadow's actions, even if Infinite was never a great guy and the escalation of his actions are all his own, but it's an escalation that could overpower Shadow, something that is rarely possible. It's just a shame that none of this plays a role in the main game, and any compelling, disorienting moments are buried in throwaway dialogue and uninspired level design. Shadow is lumped in with the rest of the cast once he shows up again, which is disappointing, but I guess it's nice to see him actively join Team Sonic to fight a greater enemy. Shadow's role in Sonic Forces is simultaneously essential and underwhelming. In terms of how they utilize and characterize him, yeah, it's fine. A little harsh and abrasive, but he's just running around taking down major threats as best he can, and momentarily faces someone who might actually pose a threat to him at full strength. Something that's only happened once before and will likely never happen again. As lukewarm as the reception to Sonic Forces was, it played a significant role in the Sonic franchise for a few years after, giving creatives an excuse to play around with the larger cast even a little bit. But I think the greatest thing the Sonic Forces era gave us was the Sonic Twitter takeover. In 2016, the team behind the Sonic the Hedgehog Twitter account hosted a takeover for the franchise's 25th anniversary, where Sonic and Eggman would answer fan-submitted questions. That was so popular that they did it again when Sonic Forces came out, but this time adding Shadow into the mix, and then that one was even more popular, so they've done one for basically every major Sonic game that's been released since. Although they've also recently allowed submissions from TikTok for those who kind of abandon the sinking ship that is the bird site. These are just meant to be fun little interactive ways for the fans to feel engaged with the franchise, and the questions they choose come with a lot of funny responses from the characters, but they are considered canon to most fans, at least those who want to have fun. So you'll get random bits of lore dropped into these takeovers that are probably just fun anecdotes in the moment, but become part of the larger fanon. Probably the most famous one is how Shadow takes his coffee. I remember at one point seeing all this fan art of Shadow eating coffee beans, just handfuls of them like popcorn, and I was wondering what was going on, and, well...
A Sonic Heroes fan wants to know, how do you guys take your coffee in the morning? I eat the coffee beans straight. They're delicious. And crunchy.
These things are popular not just because they're entertaining, but because they started around something of a dry spell for Sonic and Shadow especially. Shadow fans were taking any crumbs they could get at that time, and these takeovers certainly provided some good ones. Whether it's revealing that Shadow's a Swiftie,
I'm the problem, it's me.
Shadow, do you...
Are you a Swiftie?
What have I done?
or his favorite anime,
I like the one with the edgy girl and the scissor blade.
or having a genuinely sincere moment looking back on how Shadow stays strong even after all the hardship he's faced.
I look back on my past, dark, traumatic moments and use those to shield myself from the impending challenges of the future. No matter what may come, I've surely faced far worse before.
I feel like Shadow's answers are either the most depressing or the most inspiring, depending on the question.
I do find it kind of funny how Sonic Team clearly realized how much more fans would engage with these events if Shadow was in them. They included him in the takeovers promoting Sonic Colors Ultimate and Sonic Frontiers, and he's not in those games. But no one cares, because getting to see Shadow realize that Sega won't let him swear anymore is hilarious.
You may think you can stop me, Sega Twitter team, but if I said it in the game, I'll find a way to say it on Twitter. That fourth Chaos Emerald. Ugh! Fourth Chaos Emerald! Curse you, Sega.
These takeovers did feel like a way to satisfy a need from their fanbase that Sonic Team weren't quite sure how to fulfill in the main series. Shadow was stagnant in pretty much every form of Sonic media at that point. Present because of his popularity, but unsure of how to utilize him in a way that would resonate with his fanbase. If you want a great example of this, look no further than the IDW comics. We went over this quite a bit in the last History of Shadow video, but Sega mandates and struggles with implementing Shadow into the comics' ongoing stories were making it difficult to incorporate him into the comics, and when he was involved in a story, he would do very stupid and unpopular things. Since I made that last video, Shadow has had about 3 noteworthy appearances in the IDW comics, so we'll just knock them all out at once. During the Urban Warfare storyline in issue 59, Sonic and the gang run into Team Dark when they're infiltrating one of Eggman's bases. A self-replicating, perpetually building metropolis powered by humongous artificial Chaos Emeralds. All already a tall, destructive order, but then Eggman releases a wave of shadow androids. This is another display of Shadow's own power being turned against him, but it definitely feels significantly less reckless than when this happened in the past, and it actually gets kind of interesting. First off, it is kind of amusing to see Shadow be so insulted by the androids and the fake emeralds. It takes his dismissive, condescending attitude in these comics and shifts it towards knockoffs of his identifying features. It's really fun to me. But when Shadow taps into the nearby chaos energy from these fake emeralds to overpower the androids, which Tails suggests, by the way, this wasn't Shadow's idea, the ultimate life form, tapping into a theoretically ever-growing power source, causes the crystal to go haywire, and Shadow is overwhelmed and immobilized. I can think of times where Shadow has been overpowered, has his power turned against him in a fight, and exhausted himself, but never have I seen Shadow be so overwhelmed by wielding so much power. These crystals aren't siphoning Shadow of his internalized chaos energy, they're tapping into him like a battery, one that can continue to perpetuate chaos energy with no end in sight. It incapacitates Shadow, flowing through him at such an accelerated rate to the point that he can barely think or move. It's not until Silver gives him an opening, and even a pep talk, that he's able to clear his head enough to harness and manipulate the fake emeralds to turn Eggman's power against him, destroying the entire foundation. This is a much more interesting use of the tropes that can be frustrating about IDW Shadow, and definitely makes him feel more like a member of a team than a stubborn loner, which is always refreshing. The Shadow androids do feel like set dressing, admittedly, but to be fair, no Sonic story has ever used those things in a compelling way, so par for the course, I suppose. Shadow wouldn't be seen again until issue 80, this time back in pure rival mode as he and Rouge race against Sonic and the gang to find a Chaos Emerald, the only Chaos Emerald not recently stolen. There's not nearly as much to say about Shadow in this arc compared to the previous one. It does have Shadow's push through a problem to solve it attitude that's prevalent in IDW, which can be equally fun and annoying. It is fun to see him in a cooperative situation with Rouge again. It does feel like both parties are ready to backstab the other when it's convenient, which I'm not a fan of, but some of the banter is nice and there is some fleeting mutual trust. The biggest problem with this one for me is that unlike something like the Chow Races storyline, there's no moment of realization for Shadow. No time where Shadow puts things in perspective and maybe realizes he's getting in his own way. And considering the double-sided nature of the Emerald Thief in question, that feels like a letdown. Instead, we get the image of Shadow Hedgehog handling a mentally ill kid for an emerald. Granted, he doesn't know that, but it's a you don't know because you didn't ask situation. Which again seems odd considering how much Shadow valued resources and information earlier in this very storyline. He was being thoughtful and strategic, not throwing around a troubled teen. Shadow barges through everything to get this last Chaos Emerald, but by the end decides he doesn't really need it right now, and leaves. And that's it. In the main book, as far as I know, we haven't seen him since. However, just last year, Shadow was a main player in Sonic's crossover with the Justice League. They even teased this crossover before anyone knew it was coming by posting this little animation of Shadow dressed as Batman. How could you not be hyped by that? Even if you didn't know what you were supposed to be hyped for, they knew what they were doing. You take two of the coolest things that have ever existed and combine them. The crossover itself is pretty straightforward. The League winds up in Sonic's world to stop Darkseid from obtaining this universe's greatest source of power. Take a wild guess on that one. The plot is really just a means to an end. The appeal of this is, like most crossovers, the interactions and team-ups between our two sets of heroes. They paired them up perfectly. I could spend a while on how well each team-up between a Sonic character and a Justice League member works, but to keep ourselves focused, let's talk about Shadow and Batman. It's a pairing that, on some level, I do find kind of amusing because everybody else is teamed up with someone who is similar to them in personality and in power scale, and then they team up the ultimate life form with the guy whose only superpowers are punching and money. But it's pretty obvious what they have in common. Their introverted attitudes and their strong sense of justice and protection, motivated by a past tragedy. One of the most famous scenes from this crossover is when Bruce gets Shadow alone and asks him who he lost. I feel like it's one of the few times in canon Shadow has ever been open about why Maria's death haunts him so much. Not just that it happened and it wasn't fair, but because for all of his power, he couldn't save the one person he cared about. He even mourns again when it's believed their world has been destroyed and that he failed to fulfill Maria's wish, trying to cope by carrying on his mission of protection in the DC universe. He fights Joker at one point, and Joker calls him Edgy Hedgy. Oh my god, I can't believe I live in a world where that was said in official material. Again, the event of this crossover is nothing remarkable, it's pretty standard, but everything else is just so appealing. The action, the banter, the camaraderie is just so much fun. It's a blast. Everyone gets a couple moments to shine, including Shadow, and I feel like it would make any fan of either franchise smile a little bit. At the time of making this video, a sequel has already started hitting shelves, bringing in new characters and upping the stakes. I've seen a couple pages of it, and it's got the same energy as the first crossover, which is awesome. IDW is using Shadow much more sparingly these days, and honestly, I think that might be for the best. If they are under the same mandates with Shadow that they used to be, I think finding just the right circumstances to bring him in, rather than trying to use him in every major event, gives them a bit more wiggle room with Shadow, which results in better appearances. Although it's hard to tell what goes on behind the scenes at IDW these days, because the crew aren't on social media as often as they used to be, because social media is mean. There were plans to give Shadow his own dedicated miniseries called Chasing Shadows, which sounded fascinating. I was really anticipating it. I even put this very video off for a year so I could feature Chasing Shadows, and then they quietly canceled it.
Curse you, Sega.
As we'll see, IDW is the one place that is still struggling with Shadow, but stuff like the DC crossover does give me some optimism that we'll get there, especially with how well received everything else featuring Shadow has been in the last couple of years, such as Sonic Prime is the only new Sonic show since the last time I talked about Shadow's appearances in the cartoons, and man, this show should probably get its own video someday. There's so much to say, but again, we're gonna stay focused. When I heard Shadow was gonna be featured on the show, I was hesitant, considering his last TV appearance was
Your shoddy craftsmanship brings shame on all hedgehog kind.
ugh. I was worried that Shadow would be, once again, thrown into a series simply because he's popular, and they wouldn't find, at the very least, an entertaining way to incorporate him.
And by the way, he roller skates.
They're air shoes.
Actually, I think we might be okay. Turns out Shadow's pretty great in this series. They use his role as the rival outsider with his own mission separate from the rest of Team Sonic as a way to enhance the show's initial mystery. Throughout the first season, Shadow appears in an almost ghostly form, flickering in and out of existence as Sonic travels between alternate realities, calling out futilely to steer Sonic in the right direction the best he can. Why Sonic winds up in all these other universes is the core question of the season, and when Season 2 begins and they reunite, Shadow is the one to deliver the answer. This is where Shadow's role becomes far more clear, what it means to be Sonic's rival when they are the only surviving denizens of their universe. An often speculated about but rarely showcased area of Shadow is how, if he was raised by scientists and studied along with them, he's probably quite smart and intuitive. This is present in Prime, as he spends his time alone in the void gathering intel and piecing together what happened to their world and, hopefully, how to fix it. Shadow can be insightful, especially when it comes to the properties of powerful gems. There's been a big problem with Shadow picking fights with Sonic for no good reason, just because it's fun to watch these two fight. Here, while Shadow is abrasive and dismissive, his anger and insistence to do this himself is pretty justified. Sonic caused this disaster, and he doesn't trust him to fix it, so he'll take matters into his own hands by any means necessary. And it's just as cool, if not cooler, to watch them fight for a good reason. Who'da thunk? This fight goes on for a while, and it by no means gets old. The way the characters move in general in this show is pretty appealing, but that's a subject for if I ever make a full Prime video. Shadow does look down on Sonic and his views, but knows when it's important to step in and help out for a good cause, forming an alliance that is antagonistic, yet cooperative. I think that's the true strength of Shadow's involvement in this particular series. It pits Sonic and Shadow's views against each other, but still gets them to cooperate since they have a similar end goal. Shadow is driven by logic and quick results, Sonic puts his faith in others, and that takes time and trust. Two things Shadow has in short supply, but if that's what it takes to get Sonic to move, he'll play along. After seeing him as such a loner, it's great to have Shadow actively stand alongside Sonic in many dire situations, even if he'll have an air of condescension when he is helping.
And if you're not gonna help, you can...
Oh, I can help.
At the time, this was a really fresh take on Shadow. Shadow and Amy might be the most well-represented characters in this entire show, and that's a high mark for both of them. He's not shoehorned in. He's a valuable asset, a challenging opposing force alongside Sonic, and is essential to saving both Sonic's life and the entire multiverse.
I am the ultimate life form. I go wherever I want.
There's also just little details that really add to the enjoyment of watching Shadow on the show, like using his air shoes to propel himself forward in flight, this little flip trick he does that got everyone's attention with its overwhelming riz. He even has a new voice actor, Ian Hanlon, who does such a great job in this role. I even tweeted about how much I like Shadow on the show, and Hanlon replied to it. I didn't tag him or anything, he just found me somehow, and that made my thoughts on him even better. Shadow says, "Come at me, bro," and I did not cringe. That's how good this is. Timeline-wise, Sonic Prime felt like a glimmer of hope when it came to Shadow. They found just the right balance of how to make him antagonistic, yet noble, powerful, but not conflict-breaking. It bridged the gap between years of brooding and character butchering, and was a sign that the best was in fact yet to come. 2024 was dubbed by Sega and Sonic Team as the Year of Shadow, headlined by a massive promotional event called the Fearless Year of Shadow, and packed to the brim with Shadow-focused content, most of which revolved around a big announcement that Sonic Generations would not only be getting a re-release on modern consoles, but would come with a brand new Shadow-centric campaign, Shadow Generations. I'm sure most of you watching this were there, but for those in the far-off future who weren't, it's hard to overstate just how hyped up this game was. Months of build-up, exciting trailers featuring old faces and new features, and tons of expanded material. So just a heads up, the rest of this video is going to be Shadow Generations themed, but I think that's what most of you have been waiting for anyway. So get ready.
Could he have survived? No, that can't be. I need answers.
Shadow Generations Dark Beginnings was a trilogy of online shorts that acted as a sort of prequel to the game, foreshadowing the unusual phenomena that leads to Shadow going off on his own during the events of Sonic Generations, coupled with never-before-seen vignettes of Shadow's time on the Ark. These kinds of glimpses into Shadow's life before the Ark disaster are invaluable to a Shadow fan. It's something everyone wonders about. What was Shadow's early life like? What did he and Maria get up to when they weren't staring out the window thoughtfully? These segments into the past are brief and in some cases distorted and corrupted, but they give some amazing new insight into Shadow's early days. Keep in mind, Shadow's story has been retconned a lot since SA2, or at the very least, they've added a lot since then. Dark Beginning is the first attempt to merge all these extra pieces together into something not just cohesive, but compelling. Like how Shadow feels guilty that his creation hasn't cured Maria's illness, or the fact that Shadow was apparently aware that he comes from the Black Arms, even if he didn't know what that was. Conflicted in his identity and purpose, whether or not he's fulfilling it, and if he even can. All while Maria is telling him that she loves and believes in him just as he is. There's a peek into the tense relationship Shadow shared with a young Abraham Towers. There's even a deleted scene where they were all schooled together. A relationship that gets a payoff in the present day that's surprisingly sentimental, especially for these two. This is the first animated project with a Team Dark action scene. They show the fight with ML where he went berserk, for crying out loud, brought to center stage with some truly incredible animation work. The odd way the models can look sometimes notwithstanding, this might genuinely be the best looking Sonic animation ever made. From high-paced and elaborate action that complements the abilities of the participants in exhilarating ways, to depicting Shadow's loss and trauma through some really disorienting and heart-pounding imagery. These 15 minutes alone are a veritable smorgasbord for anyone who is very fond of this corner of the Sonic universe. It recounts Shadow's very convoluted and melodramatic backstory in a way where it hits every emotional beat that has made it stick with audiences for so long. I felt more towards Shadow in those 15 minutes than I had in the last 10 years. And it turns out this was, in fact, just the beginning.
Shadow the Hedgehog, the lone dark warrior
who judges the world by his own code. The past will return to haunt him.
We've talked about the dichotomy between Sonic and Shadow in past videos, and I think Sonic X Shadow Generations really reflects it. Sonic, being stuck in his past adventures, has fun corkscrew running paths, vibrant, varied, and adventurous locations, and the occasional monster that can be stopped with little effort. Meanwhile, Shadow being stuck in his past means confronting his trauma in a way he can think and feel and reconcile with, as it forces him to endure grief, dysmorphia, and stand in front of those he thought were gone forever. This is much less fun for him, but very fun for us. Shadow Generations takes place at the same time Sonic Generations does. When Shadow returns to the Ark to investigate an unusual anomaly, that turns out to be his own blast from the past.
You.
Family reunion, yay!
Or at least a remnant of Black Doom that had survived his battle with Shadow. Strong enough to reach out to Shadow, but not enough to reform his body or be a threat to anyone else. When the shenanigans with the Time Eater start, Shadow and Doom are sent to their own little white space, swallowing up other characters as well, like Omega, Orbot and Cubot, and Big the Cat, for some reason. Have they talked to each other before this? Like ever? But there's only a couple that are very, very significant. Because if the Time Eater can pull people from any given point in time, logically that could also apply to those from the past, no longer in the present.
Wait.
This was the big draw for Shadow Generations. Outside of being a fun-filled fan service fest, it was also something thought impossible. A chance for Shadow to see Maria and Professor Gerald again, and what would happen if he was given that chance. Shadow Generations approaches this with precision and care. Because here's the thing, Shadow's lore is a mess. It always has been, like from day one. It's why Generations has this little summary going over all the really important stuff that hasn't been relevant in this franchise for a very long time. There were people born when Shadow 05 came out who would be graduating high school when Shadow Generations came out. Let's all just take a second to grapple with our mortality. Okay, moving on. So the premise of running around in a condensed space containing one's past ideally means exploring all the implications of Shadow's complicated history, and the game kind of embraces that. A lot of people kept saying going in this direction was regressing Shadow's character after he had moved on from his past, but I just don't think that's true. There is a progression to how Shadow deals with all this. At first, he tries to ignore his feelings about the past, trying not to get swept up in the possibilities of this situation and staying laser focused on the mission at hand. It's only when those parts of his past become harder to ignore does he have to deal with them. Deal with the best and worst of his history and how he'll reckon with that as the hedgehog he is now. The events of this campaign do try to trap Shadow into the same cycles of torment he's been in the past, particularly with Black Doom. Now, in a space free of time and restrictions, Black Doom is able to accelerate his plans of renewal and conquest through Shadow, reclaiming what he believes to be his ultimate prize through unexpected means. A big development in this game is the reveal that Black Doom is tapping into the Black Arm's DNA within Shadow to give him new abilities. Sprouting wings, surfing on water, turning into a squid.
Hey Shadow, what was your favorite Doom power to use in the white space?
Doom Morph.
Doom Morph? What's that?
I lose my mortal form to become a ball of chaos, smashing through everything in my path. Jealous?
Honestly, a little bit.
The scenes where he gets these abilities are clearly painful for him and are meant to make Shadow more subservient and ready to be Black Doom's greatest asset. But what ends up happening is that Shadow wields these powers to defy Black Doom and any other threat at every turn. Remember, Black Doom's hold on Shadow through their shared DNA was enough to immobilize him last time. Now, as he taps into and unlocks more of that DNA, it becomes something Shadow harnesses freely and only questions enough to understand what's happening to him and how to use it to stop Doom. If he must have traits connected to the Black Arms, he's going to control those powers on his terms, not Doom's. That's the key here. Shadow is facing a bunch of traumatizing things from his past, but he's grown so much since those previous encounters that he faces each one with a more confident determination, no longer seeking answers for his past, but solutions to his present. When he faces the Bio-Lizard, he speaks sympathetically about fighting it only to end this poor creature's suffering. When he fights Metal Overlord, he dismisses his boasting about being a superior artificial life form. When he's confronted by Mephiles again, he doesn't ask who this guy is or how he's supposed to know him as Mephiles fights to return to the timeline. He just eliminates a threat before it can do great harm. And even though Shadow is hurt and perplexed by his new Black Arms mutations, he never succumbs to Black Doom's words, never questions his purpose, never doubts who he is. Black Doom may claim he's learned from their last encounter, but it's very clear that so has Shadow. If there's one place Shadow has some doubts, it's interacting with Maria and Gerald again. This has two sides. The one we were all anticipating, which is how Shadow would act towards Maria, and that's pretty emotional. This expression when he's hugged by his best friend / surrogate sister again breaks my heart in 9 different ways, and he does contemplate briefly if, perhaps, he can take advantage of this situation and save them. It's admittedly not a thought the game explores much, but I think it shows the more problematic side of Shadow's more protective and stalwart attitude. Whenever he has a moment with Maria or Gerald, he doesn't really take advantage of it. He speaks to them briefly, and then is racing off immediately to protect them and stop this force that could hurt them, being overly vigilant, perhaps to make up for when he couldn't be. But the other side of this is how Maria feels seeing Shadow again. Sure, presumably she saw the Shadow of the past right before this happened, but needless to say, a lot has happened to this future version of her best friend / surrogate brother, and it's obvious to her right from the start, when she's perplexed at where Shadow learned to fight with such force. It's a kind of thing we don't really think about, but is inevitable when you do. Shadow's always been a bit distant, suspicious, and condescending from the glimpses we've gotten to his life on the Ark, but he hadn't experienced tragedy, never had to fight for his, at the time, short life, hadn't seen anything of the world beyond that space station. Maria is reuniting with her best friend, but is meeting a very different hedgehog. Someone who has lost family, made friends, tested his limits, touched grass. Someone who has been broken down and rebuilt time and time again. Shadow is very protective and just, yes, but also very angry, fighting non-stop to fulfill his own missions. It's an attitude that upsets Maria. There's this really cute reveal that Maria gave Shadow his name, and while the explanation is kinda corny, what it reveals is that Shadow might still be misinterpreting her last wish. When Maria said, "Give them a chance to be happy," she meant Shadow too.
I don't want you to be driven by darkness. I want you to be happy.
When you spend so long looking out for others, it's easy to forget yourself. By the time he takes on Black Doom, he finds the balance between looking out for the world and finding happiness in that cause. That's why I'm not a fan of the idea that this is a regression for Shadow. The point of Shadow's arc in the Adventures era was not letting the tragedies and abuse of his past define his path forward. Not to let others tell him who he should be, but figure out who he could be. That is what he left behind. But he hasn't allowed himself to remember the good, what his loved ones taught him and what they wanted for him before everything went wrong. Maria was right to give him that name, not just for the reason she gave, but because a shadow cannot exist without darkness and light. Both are integral to its creation and existence, and that is abundantly clear for Shadow the Hedgehog. He unlocks all of Doom's horrifying powers, yet stands in defiance and protection more like a guardian angel, racing to fight an evil creature from his past for a chance at a bright future.
But I will continue to fight. Fight with your wish in my heart. Your wish for everyone to have a chance to be happy.
Wow, you actually smiled! Thought it'd never happen.
There is a pain to Shadow being reunited with his lost loved ones, only to lose them again so soon, but it's something of a gift as well. Now, his last memory of his original family is no longer this, or even this. it's this. Here, Gerald is not the man who went mad with grief and manipulated him into carrying out revenge. He's a man who is proud of how his creation has risen above his diabolical origins. Here, Maria is not on the other side of a glass wall as she cries out her last words. She holds him close as she whispers reassurances that they'll always have each other no matter what happens in the future. By the way, there's nothing in the game that says Gerald and Maria don't remember all of this afterwards. You ever think that part of the reason Maria went out of her way to save Shadow's life during the Ark disaster was because she knew he had a future to make it to and new friends to make, and no matter what, she probably didn't? Because I think about that a lot. Shadow was given the chance to have a real goodbye. Show them that even after everything he'll go through, he'll be okay. He'll be okay, even if he allows himself to feel for their losses every once in a while. Okay, I held it together until that very moment. Drop a comment if you cried right alongside Shadow. I don't know, man. I could talk about this game for even longer than I already have. They not only take painstaking effort to piece together long scattered fragments of Shadow's history together, but add tons of extra details to the Robotnik family history and Gerald's experiments specifically. I tried to keep this focus mainly on Shadow himself and prevent any long tangents, but trust me, I could go on for a while about a lot of what we learned here. Just a small one, Maria designed Shadow's shoes. I know that people have headcanon that for a long time, but now it's canon, it's in a journal that that's what happened. Shadow Generations is a triumph of a game that gives the rich and elaborate history of one of the franchise's most beloved characters new context that makes it worth exploring again and offers long-earned closure. Reigniting the excitement and sentiment of what makes Shadow the Hedgehog such a great character, worthy of expanding one of the best Sonic games to give him basically glorified DLC that is being hailed as one of the best Sonic games all on its own. Oh, also, Shadow Generations sort of got a manga recently, the Jet Black Hedgehog Shadow the Hedgehog. It's a very loose adaptation that I was gonna cover here, but turns out Koro is very strict with sharing their material online, so yeah, sorry, not risking that. If it ever gets released officially in English, I'll do an impressions video on the Patreon or something. I just wanted you to know that I know it exists. As much as I'm glad Shadow Generations exists, I do agree with one major consensus. Now that we've given Shadow something resembling closure and sent him on a new path of tackling his life, we have to keep moving forward. The Year of Shadow proved that Sonic Team finally cares about Shadow again. They want to explore him, and this proved they could. What Sonic material there's been since does offer a bit of assurance. Stuff like his attitude in the Justice League crossover and even Sonic Racing Crossworld offer a more palatable balance between dismissive condescension and thoughtful heroism. When I first started the History of Shadow series, it was to bring a spotlight to my favorite Sonic character, someone who, while popular, I felt wasn't getting the flowers he deserved. Not just to show that people love Shadow, but why they love Shadow. I am deeply grateful that someone at Sega finally got the memo, and that the Year of Shadow represented everything that makes Shadow the ultimate life form. Still, it did make me realize how long it's been since any of this stuff that makes up who Shadow is has been touched on. There's probably a whole generation of Sonic fans that didn't experience Shadow's history and growth. They may learn about it through the internet or something, but it's not the same. If only there was a way to introduce Shadow all over again. To bring the story of the ultimate life form to a whole new generation. Oh, that's right. The Year of Shadow had one other big release, didn't it? But that's a story so big that we're gonna have to talk about it at length next time. Thanks for watching, everyone. Definitely let me know what your thoughts on the Year of Shadow were and what you hope to see from Shadow in the future in the comments below. That's why the series is called Let's Talk About. Also, I'm gonna apologize if I sound weird in this video. I've got that head cold that's going around the country and it will not leave. I want to give a very special thanks to my patrons who help support my content, including Jinx Productions and Wait in the Wings. If you'd like to join these fine people in supporting my content while getting cool exclusive perks, including a first impression series on the Chaotix case files if you're a Sonic the Hedgehog fan, you can check out my Patreon page at the link in the description, as well as my other social media if you'd like to check any of those. Thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you guys for Sonic 3 next time.